welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone, from beginner to expert, can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. As you can see, today we have a really fun interview. I interviewed Mark Lane and we explored the topic of the future of gardening. And I feel like this episode, it reminded me a lot of one that I just did recently where I talked about the coolest plant tech and all of the upcoming gadgets that there are or existing gadgets. And it was really fun discussing with Mark all the exciting things that there are in the gardening realm in regards to new plant technology and where gardening is going. Before I get into our conversation, I quickly want to do our giveaway winners for today's episode. So every episode I do 2 giveaway winners. I choose someone who has left a review on Apple Podcasts, and then I also choose someone who has commented on the most recent episode on Spotify. So whether you are listening on Apple or you're listening on Spotify, you can have a chance to win. And what you're winning as a giveaway winner is a bottle of Prop Drops from Market Botany. And what Prop Drops are, they are a water propagation aid. So it has like a little dropper and you put a few drops of this into the water that you are propagating your plants in. And it really helps them take off. I've loved using it. I honestly don't propagate anything in water without my prop drops anymore. And if you want to just check them out, you can go to marketbotany.com and you can even use code PLANTSCHOOLPODCAST for a discount on your order. Okay, so let's get into our winners for today. Let's start with Apple Podcasts, someone who has left a review. Today's winner, their username is rad1824, and they said, love, love, love the Plant School podcast. I always learn something new in a fun and digestible way. The Pothos episode was great. I love Pothos and have a Marble Queen, Golden, P&J, Enjoy, Neon, and several other Epiprimnum varieties. Thanks for the show. Thank you so much for that kind review. If that was you that left that review, rad1824, go ahead and email me at tennyplants@gmail.com. That's TENNEY plants@gmail.com. All right, and let's quickly go on over to Spotify. So someone who left a comment on the last episode, it was all about orchids, and the person that won, that was randomly chosen, their username is SHH, and they said, I am so happy to have found this podcast as I have recently been very into plants. I just got an orchid and wanted to get some care tips. Thank you. I'm so glad that the timing worked out for that episode, and if that was you that left that comment, go ahead and email me as well at tennyplants@gmail.com. I will get your address and we'll get those prop drops sent your way as well. And if you would like a chance at winning on the next episode, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, go ahead and leave a review. Or if you are listening on Spotify, go ahead and leave a comment on this episode. Since we are discussing the future of gardening, for those on Spotify, I want you to comment if there's anything in this episode that makes you excited about the future of gardening or the future of the green world in general. Or you can comment something else. I always mention this. You can comment anything and that will automatically enter you in, but I will often give like a little prompt just to kind of have a fun discussion, but feel free to comment anything you want if you are listening on Spotify. And before I start my conversation with Mark Lane, I just really quickly wanted to say I really appreciate you being here and listening. It really does mean the world to me to like have this community to make this podcast for. All your guys' kind words, emails, comments, reviews, it really means a lot to me. I feel like the past few episodes have been a little crazy on when I'm posting them, and I feel like I've been doing a lot of interviews lately, and that's not the usual for me. It was like this influx of everyone asking if they could chat with me, which I'm so grateful for, but I just wanted to mention that so that you know my normal content of like doing care guides and things like that will be resuming. I just have this influx of interviews that will be passing through in the next few weeks. But I appreciate your guys' patience with me. It's been a few very busy months. I feel like I am still getting used to having 4 children. I had my youngest, quite a few months ago, but I still feel like I'm adjusting. I'm sure anyone that has kids can relate and understand. And so, keeping up on the podcast as summer has been starting, I just went overseas to a friend's wedding. It's been a little bit crazy for me. So, I just appreciate your patience. I appreciate you being here and listening. And I really appreciate you guys understanding. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and play this conversation I had with Mark Lane. I really hope you guys enjoy it because I absolutely loved chatting with him and he had a lot of great things to share. All right, and without further ado, here's my conversation with Mark Lane about the future of gardening. All right, today I'm so excited. We have on with us Mark Lane, and he is a gardener. He is a landscape designer. And he is also a regular TV presenter on BBC's Morning Live Gardening segment, and he's an author as well. He's written Royal Gardens of the World, and just recently he released The Future of Gardens, which is kind of what we'll be discussing today. And to start off, Mark, I wanted to ask you, how did you first become interested in gardening and garden design?
In gardening, I think it's like a lot of gardeners, primarily through my grandparents. On my father's side, my grandfather used to grow vegetables at the end of the garden. So he taught me about how to care for the soil, how to tie in plants, how to sow seeds. And then my grandmother, she was a flower arranger. So she taught me about shape, color, form, scent, and how to put them all together. And then on my mother's side, my grandparents' garden was just full of roses. And I sort of got this love-hate relationship with roses now because all I remember as kids is just going out there and having to squish the black fly with our fingers or green fly with our fingers and then picking up all the leaves that had black spot on them. So that's how I got into gardening, and it stuck with me, I suppose. And even now, even when I'm presenting or writing or whatever it is, every now and then those lovely memories come back to, when I was a kid in my grandparents' gardens. And it's lovely to have that. And I think that's what gardening does as well. It's a lovely thing that you can do on your own. You can do it socially, you can do it in groups. It doesn't matter. It doesn't discriminate, which I also love about gardening. So yeah, that's how I got into gardening. Garden design was a little bit of a circuitous route, I suppose. So after studying history of art at University College London, I became the publishing director for the Royal Institute of British Architects, and then the managing editor for Thames and Hudson, who are the international arts publisher. And then unfortunately in the year 2000, I was in a car crash, and it meant I had to rethink my career. And I was very lucky in the sense that where my 12-month rehabilitation was, we had a horticultural therapist, and she got me out of my bed. She got me outdoors, sowing some seeds, planting some bulbs. And for that sort of 10 minutes or so that I was outside, I completely forgotten about the pain, the worry, the depression, everything else that came with the accident, because I was just focused on that moment there and then. And so after that, when I got home, a little seed was sort of sown to where it was like, well, Mark, you've got this artistic background, you've got sort of an encyclopedic brain for plants. Why don't you do something with it? So I did, and I retrained as a garden designer, and I haven't looked back since. And really from the garden design came the TV work and then the books and everything else. So I've been very, very lucky.
Yeah, you've done a lot in the gardening world. As I was looking around at your social media, I saw also you help out with the Chelsea Flower Show. And I've been to that twice.
Yeah.
And I have a sister out in London, and that is the one thing that we will always go and do together. And so to see you there, I'm like, wow, what an experience to be able to, get deep into those designs and help present them and things like that.
It is incredible. I mean, Chelsea is the pinnacle of horticulture, really. And I feel very privileged to be able to do that. And also, speak to the designers, also speak to the landscapers as well, because unfortunately it's always the designer that gets the recollection. It's never the landscapers who do the physical hard work of building the gardens, which I always think is a real shame. And also, I'm lucky that in the sense that I can get into the show when there's no public, which is even better.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's very tricky because, as you know, when you're there are so many people that you do what's known as the Chelsea shuffle, because you're literally just shuffling along, trying to see the gardens, and you can't always see right into the garden. So actually, although I shouldn't say this, you actually get a better view of the show by watching it on TV. Because the cameras can get right into each garden.
It's so true. That did surprise me how crowded it could get. And people are very polite. You'll get your turn, but it takes a few minutes. So I
So,
agree. So with this book that you have just written, The Future of Gardens, it's kind of part of a series. There's like the future of energy, the future of all these different sort of topics. And so you have obviously written the one on gardening. And I wanted to ask you, like, how did this come about? Is this something that you've been interested in, or how did you get chosen to write The Future of Gardens?
That's a very good question. I've no idea. No, I've always had this fascination, I suppose, with technology and how technology can either help or hinder, I suppose. And obviously, I love everything to do with gardening and gardens and horticulture. So it was the publisher who approached me and said, we've got the series, we'd love to do one on gardens. Would you be interested? And I was sort of like, okay, let me read a couple of in the series to get an idea of the sorts of thing that you want. And every single one is completely different, which I think is so marvelous as well. And everyone's approach is completely different. And they gave me complete free reign. So I couldn't really say no to it because, I could just write whatever I wanted. But I'm a huge sci-fi fan as well. And, you always see in sci-fi movies, sort of plants growing in space and, everybody eating sort of food that's been grown as well. And I just sort of thought, well, it's a bit like, does sci-fi dictate what happens in real life, or does real life dictate what happens in the sci-fi movies? So I've always had that fascination with it. So I thought, yeah, why not? I'll put it all together in this sort of mini book, packed with ideas, hopefully. But I also wanted to show that, yes, I know that we've all got climate change going on. We're having these periods, the hotter summers as well. And I know that a lot of people would see that, and they could see that gardening could be quite alarming, as in the sense of, well, what can I do in order for my garden to survive and my plants to survive? So I'm hoping that through the book, it's quite positive. There's a lovely positive sort of undertone to it, because I think that with the right technology, and we are actually using quite a bit already that already uses this sort of future tech in a positive way, can actually mean that we can just get on and get out there, get our hands dirty, while the technology can be there to assist us.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into my next question, because I wanted to ask you, I just finished your book last night. Loved it, by the way. I feel like there were so many points that I could just stop and think on, because like you said, it was just packed full of information. So in like the future of gardening, do you feel like it should be something filled with hope or with fear? And speaking to the fear part, like why would someone be afraid, and what would you say to kind of combat that?
I think the future is a positive future. I think the fear element comes from the unknown, really. It's a bit like, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when the internet first started up, and everybody, panicked because everyone thought, oh gosh, it's going to take over the world. What's going to happen with security? Who knows what that information is? Is it going to be correct, etc.? It's exactly the same with artificial intelligence, the same with augmented reality. We don't know enough about it. I think the scientists will know more about it and all that sort of thing, but us, general folk, we don't know the ins and outs of it all. So I think it's that unknown, which is the fear. But I do think that actually, AI in particular can do stuff at an incredibly alarming rate very, very quickly, and give you the information that you probably need, which can only really benefit anybody, whether you're a newbie to gardening or whether you're a seasoned gardener. If you want to know how to grow a particular plant, and you can just sort of type something in and up it comes and tells you, brilliant. But going back to my sort of publishing days, I do panic, and I mentioned this in the book, about the fact, well, is the information that the AI bots going out into the ether, giving you that information, is it the right information? Because at the end of the day, as gardeners, we're dealing with living plants. So you want them to survive, you don't want them to die. So as long as that information that's given from the AI or from augmented reality or whatever it will be, as long as it's correct, then it's absolutely fine. And I think it's that as well. It's that sort of policing of the information and the dissemination of that information and how it will be put to people, which sort of scares a lot of people. But I think it's a positive thing. I think the future of gardens is positive.
Yeah. And when you look to the future, like what do green spaces look like to you in the future? And I know you talked a little bit about this, but I'd love for you to talk with everyone listening what green spaces might look like in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, a lot of it does come down to climate. So because of the hotter weathers, hotter summers and the wetter winters that we're getting, and also the sort of milder winters as well, which aren't really killing off a lot of pests and diseases, we are having to rethink the types of plants that go into our gardens, especially in the future. So things like, being a resilient gardener, going for native plants that are more resilient and adapted to their natural environment. I think we'll start seeing more native plants. We're seeing this especially in sort of like Chelsea show gardens as well. We're seeing this sort of coming through a lot more. I think we'll see a lot more sort of vertical green spaces as well. We'll also see sort of more green roofs. We'll see solar panels as well, helping sort of power stuff. I think with regards to soil, it will still come down to the basics of making sure that we compost and we mulch on a regular basis and making sure that it's all done in the right way. I think it's also sort of like following permaculture basis where we're sort of mimicking what nature does, not using things like pesticides or insecticides. So again, going back to sort of natural cycles and natural rhythms. But I think it's going to be a very sort of strong sort of green environment because, at the end of the day, we want to attract the wildlife because we know that bee populations are down and we do need to make sure that we can keep the bee populations up because at the end of the day, all of our stuff is pollinated by bees. So by introducing those sort of native plants that are adapted to those local environments, they're therefore adapted to the local fauna as well. So the bees, hummingbirds in America, etc. So yeah, I think that's the sort of vision I probably can see how the future of gardens will go. And then it will be behind the scenes will be the tech sort of working what needs to be done to make it more efficient, making it sort of greener in the sense of the technology, in the sense of solar panels or photovoltaic cells. And then on top of that, you then start getting things like augmented reality and how people might be using sort of augmented glasses to physically garden to get the information that they need there and then.
Yeah. So if someone is listening and they're like, okay, well, I want to keep up to date and maybe not like be on the cutting edge, but just like keep up with the trends in gardening so that I can have a successful garden and be like a good steward, what advice would you give to them?
I would say the first thing, one of the most imperative things to do is store what is free, and that is rainwater. So, rainwater, we all get it and we're getting more of it these days. And plants prefer rainwater to tap water as well. So, collect as much rainwater as you possibly can. When it comes to the soil, make sure you have really good soil health. So that will mean adding compost. It will mean adding manure. He's also sort of adding a mulch, either in the spring or in the autumn time. That will help keep the moisture in, keep the weeds down. And as that breaks down, that will also improve the structure of the soil as well. Then I would say, when it comes to the actual plants, just think about those native plants because, as I mentioned, those native plants are more resilient. They're more adaptable to your local environment. It's about sort of looking at the larger environment around you and seeing what is growing naturally that you can then use in your own garden. You might be able to have to use like a very closely cultivated cousin of that wild form. But as long as it's sort of very close and it's not a really hybridized plant, then you should be fine. And try and go for as many open cupped flowers as you possibly can. So that will attract all the wildlife as well. And also don't be too tidy, I think is the other important thing. leave a little corner of the garden a little bit messy, leave the grass a little bit long, maybe have some log piles for some toads and amphibians and beetles. Because the more you do that, the more alive your garden becomes. And it's about being a resilient gardener. And I talk about being a resilient, adaptable gardener, and as gardeners, we are outside. So being outside, we're on the front line. We know that, for example, especially here in the UK, we're having plants flowering at the wrong time of the year. We're seeing plants that should survive being absolutely decimated by the hot weather or by the rain. So we're having to just adapt to those plants that we actually choose. And I think, in a sense, the sort of the future aspect, especially with things like AI, if AI can start helping breeders sort of wean out the weaklings and actually help sort of bring out new plants which already survive in all these sort of varied conditions that we now have, then all the better. So I think sort of all of that all brought together, and I would always urge people to garden organically as well, because that way, you're not killing stuff with insecticides and pesticides. You'll have a lovely, thriving garden that is alive with wildlife.
Yeah. Is there something of gardening's future that is like most exciting to you? I think for me, when you talk about augmented reality, I had never thought about using that like to enhance landscape design or things like that. If I could design a landscape while I see it, that would be amazing.
I mean, it's interesting because actually a TV series over here in the UK has started using it. So the designers design the gardens, and then the clients put on the goggles, and they can sort of physically walk through the garden and see it being built up there and then sort of disappear as well back to what it was like. So, and I think that's brilliant because, it's always tricky especially when you're designing gardens, especially if something's on a flat plan and so, you're showing it to a client and they think, well, I'm not quite sure about that because the land does this, or, it leans in one direction and you've got it completely flat and I can't see it working. It's not until they see like 3D renders that they sort of get an understanding. But if you can show them physically and let them walk through that space, then they can really get a feel for that garden. And that's where I think augmented reality is going to be brilliant. And also the fact that I think augmented reality from a gardening point of view, if you try and think of it as a learning tool. So, if you are there, you're on your knees, you're gardening, you're looking at a plant, it's not doing particularly well. You think, okay, I'll just put my goggles on. You put your goggles on. You can still see the plant in front of you. But then there's all these different layers, and those layers will tell you, why that plant maybe isn't doing very well, or how you need to look after the soil around it, or maybe something's growing too much, too vigorously around it. If you can have all that information at hand, and even be able to sort of do stuff physically there and then augmented reality tell you whether that was the right way or the wrong way of doing it, or this will be the result, that's going to be an incredible tool. And I think that's a fascinating sphere to sort of be in for gardening, because as gardeners, we're always learning. There's no way you can know every single plant on the planet, every single way of gardening. Everybody has their own way of doing things as well. So, being told or being shown what to do, I think is going to be incredible.
Oh, I agree. I'm always headed to like Chat GPT to ask it my gardening questions. I'll like, I have this type of raised bed. What should I plant in it for this, season? I'm in this zone. But if you could combine it with like augmented reality and it's helping you along the way, it's almost like having like Mark Lane in my brain helping me. But yeah, I agree. So would you say that is that what is most exciting to you? Would it be augmented reality, or is there something else that is also exciting to you?
I think augmented reality is high on the list, definitely. But I think for me, it's got to be space exploration. And I write about Mars and the moon, etc. But when you sort of break it down and you sort of understand the fact that, yes, they've been growing plants on the International Space Station, other astronauts and other aeronautical places have been doing similar things around the world as well. It's just astonishing, because obviously here on the Earth, plants grow by what's known as gravitropism, i.e. gravity. So they know roots go down and the tips go up, but in space there's no gravity. So what do? So they have to build these particular environments so that the plants can actually grow in there. And okay, they're only growing very simple things like lettuce and beetroot and beets, but they're growing them and they can eat them and they can enjoy them. And it's that actual act of sowing a seed or nurturing a plant, which if someone's on a very long journey, say they are going to Mars, that act of just sowing that seed or gardening actually connects them back to Earth, because it's something that we always do here on Earth. So it connects them. So it doesn't make them feel so homesick. There's also that whole idea of being sort of, growing plants so that, especially on long journeys, is something that's going to be nutritious for them to eat as well. Also, the fact that, they're looking at all these different sort of algae and mosses and everything else that they can use to create these sort of what they're known as closed loop systems. So that even sort of human poop can be used and recycled as a fertilizer, because when we get to these celestial bodies, whether it's Mars or whatever, there's probably not going to be very fertile soil. There's not going to be probably an abundance of water. So how are we going to grow stuff? We can't always go back to the little space station and try and grow it all there. We're going to have to do it larger in a larger format somewhere. And I think that's really exciting. And I love the fact also that even now with the International Space Station, school kids can sort of dial into it and see things grow and learn about all of this. And I think that's really important. So, yeah, I mean, I would say probably the space exploration probably just tips above augmented reality for me.
Yeah, it is really exciting to learn about. And in your book, you even mentioned that there was a station out here in Utah where they are testing, how to grow things in really this Martian-like soil. I looked up where it was. It is really out in the middle of nowhere. But maybe one day I'll have to head over there since I'm out here in Utah.
Yeah.
Do you see, like, with space exploration and perhaps gardening on, like you said, these celestial bodies, do you think that will, maybe the next 100 years, do you think it would play a big part of human history?
I think so. I think I would like to think that in the next 50 to 60 years, we would have definitely got to Mars. We may have had a base there. I think even probably a base on the moon. And they're already doing tests with the sort of moon sort of substrate, which is known as regolith, and trying to grow stuff in that as well. So I think that will happen in the next sort of 50, 60 odd years. And I think in the next sort of 100 years, I think we could quite easily start seeing little colonies forming. The only issue will be, unfortunately, it will come down to greed again, and it will be whoever's first that will get there, what they take, what they say is theirs. But again, it's the power of plants and the power of gardening. If there's something that they can do which improves someone's life there on a different planet, but reminds them of home, then there's nothing better than that, really.
Yeah, I agree. So kind of switching gears here, I wanted to ask you, because you mention a lot in your book, the power of community, the power of collaborating with others. So I wanted to ask you, what are your favorite ways to grow a community in the gardening space and collaborate?
That's a lovely question, and it is true, because gardening can be a solitary thing where you can be very mindful. Weeding for me is a very mindful act. My mind wanders and it's lovely, but actually gardening with others is a brilliant way. It doesn't discriminate on age, sexuality, or anything. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I lived in an apartment block, very, very small apartment block, but we started creating this community garden outside. And I used to pop out there and I used to have these lovely conversations with an 80-year-old. And then the next day I'll be talking to a woman who'd been growing rhubarb. And I think, start small is what I would probably say. Start small somewhere, even open up a part of your garden, allow other people to come in, maybe sort of allow them to garden, maybe give them a look. Because before you know it, you'll be sharing stories, you'll be sharing tips and tricks. To give you a lovely example, I'm an ambassador for a charity that uses social and therapeutic horticulture. And they've got this beautiful walled garden. And a lot of the time their clients either have a physical disability or a mental disability. And a lot of the time, they would never have spoken with another person whatsoever. You give this person a little raised bed You say to them that you can paint it whatever you want, you can decorate it however you want. These are the seeds that you can go and grow them. Within literally a few days, if not a few hours, they're talking like this constantly with their neighbors, and suddenly their life has opened up. And it's all through that power of a plant, really. So I would say, yes, start small. Those tips and tricks. I think that's what's so lovely about, everyone in the horticultural industry, is the fact that everyone likes to share knowledge. And I think that's lovely. And as I say, you can share those stories as well. And also, getting kids involved is a great way, because kids love getting their hands dirty, but we also know that, getting your hands dirty actually in the soil, in contact with a thing called Mycobacterium vaccae in the soil, is good because it releases serotonin and endorphins in the brains that makes us feel good. I always say to people, if you're in the garden, barehanded, eat a bar of chocolate at the same time, you're going to get a double hit of serotonin, but just don't mix up the soil and the chocolate. I would say, get the kids involved, and then if it starts to grow, then all the better for it. And I actually, I'm very lucky in my presenting job, because I do get to see a lot of community gardens, being able to see how they've grown as well. And sometimes it's literally been, they've taken over a small space in their neighborhood. They've just put in a few raised beds. They started growing something. And it's interesting, as soon as someone sees someone else gardening or starting to plant something in a raised bed, they'll stop. They'll come and have a chat. They'll say, "Oh, what's going on?" And then if you just say to them, "Well, why don't you pop back, tomorrow or next week when we're out and about again?" They'll probably be there. And then before you know it, they'll probably got their own little bit that they're doing themselves. And I think that's what's so lovely. And it doesn't matter if you're a complete newbie, you know absolutely nothing about gardening, or if you've got a lot of knowledge that you just want to share. Just getting out there and sharing those stories is just a wonderful thing.
I agree. I've connected with just people in my neighborhood. Online spaces are great, but I feel like connecting face to face is, for me, that's what I really love. And there's a lot of women in my neighborhood that are great gardeners, and I've loved that relationship. I feel like gardening is the near universal hobby that everyone can share.
True.
I love it so much. So one of my last questions, I wanted to ask you, if there was a message you hope readers come away with from reading your book, what would you hope that message would be?
I think the message is that despite climate change, despite the fact that spaces are getting smaller, where we're having to be able to be outside, that actually it is a positive thing. The future of gardens is a positive thing. And really, it always comes down to choice at the end of the day. It's up to you whether you want to accept what AI is going to do for you, what augmented reality can do for you. But, as gardeners, we're always adaptable. We're always out there. And get your hands dirty and just enjoy it.
I love that. So for everyone listening, where can they find your new book, and also just keep up with you? Where can they keep up with what you're up to?
Yes, so on social media, so on Instagram, X, and on TikTok, you just look for @MarkLaneTV, and that's me. The book you can find on Amazon is probably one of the best and easiest places to go to. And also, if you're just a little bit interested, you can also go to www.marklanedesigns.com, and you'll find a bit more information about me and my garden design work as well.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you coming on so much, taking the time to share with, what you've been working on, what you've been writing about. I really enjoyed your book, and I really appreciate you being here and talking with me about it.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast. And I really appreciate all that help. Or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode. And you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School podcast.